much to start. We're going to dive into some things this afternoon, but I wanted to share with you that this webinar is sponsored by the Praxis Gathering. And this year, our theme for the Praxis Gathering is Church Without Walls, and we're going to be exploring just what God is doing outside the four walls of the church. And we'll be in Chicago, and it's coming up actually fairly soon, September 28th through 30th. We've brought together some of the best practitioners from around the country who are practicing church in very creative, missional, incarnational ways. And we'd love to have you there. And so we have generated a 20% off discount code. If you go to thepracticegathering.com and you register to come and you type in discount 20, you will get 20% off. And you can share that generously if you'd like to. We would love to have you there. It's a great collection of friends, colleagues, and people who are doing really beautiful work. The the Praxis Gathering itself has been going for 7 years, but this is the first one we're having I think is at 3 years. We had a big break because of COVID. So we're excited to be back together in Chicago in a beautiful space in a beautiful city. So we'd love to have you there. Well, I want to introduce to you my friends, my good friends, and I also work with them, but first we're friends. And Jessie Cruickshank is in Colorado. Is that where you are right now, Jessie? Yep, you're there. I wasn't sure if you were traveling. I think I recognize your office, Jess, but she just came out with a book.
It's a picture. It's a picture. I'm in Colorado, but it's still a fake background because I'm not in Denver.
Ah, brilliant. She just released a book called Ordinary Discipleship, a really, really needed work. There's a lot of necessity to talk about discipleship, so I'm so grateful for Jess's work. She brings a lot of intelligence with neurology into her writing, and I love it. J.R. Woodward, where are you, J.R.? Are you in Seattle?
No, well, that's where I live, but I'm in Richmond, Virginia. So, and I took a red eye last night. So if I am not fully here, please forgive me.
Okay, that's all right. Well, JR is on the East Coast, and he just released a book called The Scandal of Leadership, and it's a hot one. It's a bomb. You have to explore it, and it's really looking at the ways that people use and abuse leadership. And if you're curious about that, I recommend it. Also, another good friend of mine, Eun Strawser, who is in Hawaii right now, and she just released a really, really, really practical, helpful, profound book called Centering Discipleship. And if you're really looking to find out ways to land discipleship in your community, in your faith community, pick that book up. I'm Dan White Jr., and I'm in Puerto Rico right now. And I came a little bit stressed right now because the power went out. And so I had to get creative, turn on the generator, and see if I can make this thing happen. But I'm here with you, and we're going to talk about a topic. We've visited quite a few topics in this Church Without Walls webinar, but we're going to touch on something that's really important to me and is a real felt need and touch point when it comes to being the church, and specifically the Church Without Walls, and that is community. And we asked the question in this webinar, is community realistic? Everyone is talking about community. Everybody wants community, but is it realistic? And I just want to read for you a preface that we're going to springboard off of. To belong to a people and to a place is a core human soul hunger. Dorothy Day said, "We have all known a long loneliness at some point in our life, and then we learn that the only solution is to be loved and to love others, to attach to a community, to attach to a people that want us, include us, and love us is as old as time, but it seems like there's more tension around it than ever. Everyone wants to belong, but we still feel so lonely. And if anything, isolation and loneliness is on the meteoric rise. With our social networking apps, with our transients, we're lonely, but we long for community. So what do we do? we wanted to launch this specific webinar without being idealistic. We wanted to enter into what is really the challenge around community. So the first question that I want to pose to my friends here is, how does a church without walls step into this massive cultural moment of aloneness? How does this culture of aloneness and isolation and loneliness, how do we step into it with this idea of a church without walls? So we'll start with any one of the three panelists. Give me your thoughts. You have to unmute if you want to talk. Is there a lot of laughter going on in the background while you're muted? What's going on?
Okay, so obviously we're super great at deferring to one another.
Sure.
But I think that's the laughter is our kindness and deference. I'll come at this question from a slightly different place in that I think about, one, we're created for community. We're created to know and to be known at a foundational cellular level, biological level. And so for me, the question is like, why do we feel so alone? What's missing? What's happening that's causing that, so that we can understand the way the church can step into that. And so we're created to have a sense of belonging by actually being face to face with one another, like not even over Zoom, but like in proximity where we're face to face. Because when we do that, then we end up having this phenomenon that happens where we mirror one another, and we have what we call mutual mind. And mutual mind is amazing because our brains sync up and we actually are experiencing the same reality. And that's how we know actually what reality is. And when we don't have that, we have all of these different realities that we're walking through. We have no anchor for how to understand that. It's very disorienting. And that's what we've been experiencing these last few years since the pandemic. We are not walking through the same reality. And that creates a huge part of this sense of aloneness. I mean, obviously it existed before we had technology and things like that, but that's why I think it's at an epidemic level right now. And so I think the way that then the church without walls can step into that conversation and step into that is by actually like having things where we're face to face and we're knowing each other and we're being known by each other. And we're even if it's for 3 hours, that we could have a sense of shared reality and find those connections again. So I think that only happens when we're interacting face to face, not necessarily when we're sitting and observing the same event or the same speaker on a stage. That doesn't actually, meet that need. So I think that need is only met when we're being the church of closeness with one another, but outside the walls of, a speaker-centered kind of event.
That's great, Jess. So you're saying that proximity is something worth fighting for, right? That getting face to face, although that, a lot of church growth would say digital pragmatically is effective and efficient. Let's just put all our cards in that basket. You're saying it's worth fighting for to be in person because there's something that happens there, mutual mind, a shared sense of reality that can't happen in other domains.
Yeah, we don't even get it over this. We may get slight, indications of it or moments of it, but we don't even get it over this. So yes, Jess. Worth fighting for.
That's good. Eun.
Yeah, I love that, Jessie, that you brought up the pandemic because, and true to what Jessie just said, that the pandemic didn't start loneliness, it just accentuated isolation. And so it helped us to more correctly define what this loneliness is, right? Because we can also have loneliness when, the busiest city in the world, New York City, and most of the population there would still say that even in a overly populated cultural context, people would still say that I still feel lonely. So it's not just about loneliness isn't just about can you be with people physically? Can you, or is it just a physical isolation from humanity, right? Loneliness can happen in both places. So I think the pandemic more correctly defines it as a social disconnection. You can have social disconnection that breeds in you loneliness that you're trying to find an answer to or have a quick fix to, right? All those kinds of things, whether you're in a big, huge crowd of people in person, or if you are feeling that isolation, you've been quarantining, for the past 3 years, right? Both extreme settings, people can still feel loneliness. So the pandemic in that physical isolation accentuated that problem. But I think loneliness, like Jessie was saying, has been happening and has been around for a while. In my local context, as a church planter, probably we have one-on-one conversations with every person who wants to be committed to our community, but we want to have clarity on what that commitment looks like. And I guarantee you, one of the first things that we have to talk about when we're having these one-on-one conversations with folks who are so excited about being a part of a missional community, being a part of a church that's doing something different. It feels like church without walls, right? All that kind of stuff here in Hawaii. One of our biggest conversations is, how do you define community and what is your expectation of it? And a lot of time it's trying to have a conversation with people who are yearning for, I want to find my best friend in this. That's my expectation. I have an expectation that the entire community will become my best friends or my family. And that's the expectation. And we have to actually do the hard work of saying that's not what our church community actually exists for, right? So it's not, I think that this conversation is not just trying to define that loneliness is about a social disconnection, but it is also trying to redefine or more clearly define what it means to be a community with a church that's trying to be a church without walls.
That's good. I mean, that's pretty surgical that you're when you talk about community, you're talking about dealing with unsaid or said expectations. And that seems to be a really important dynamic to having a community that's sustainable. Tell me a little bit more about those expectations.
Oh, yeah. I think that it's probably how, oh my gosh, JR Woodward, I'm probably going to just steal from you anyway. But the people are having that deep sense of a need to belong, right? Just like they have a deep sense for like beauty and truth and all those kinds of things that make us human. Yeah. Like Jessie's saying, it is a deep human thing that we want to belong. But sometimes I think that need to belong becomes an idol that the church cannot meet. And when that happens, it's all of these like broken expectations that probably bring so much brokenness, turmoil, a lot of hurt. And I'm like, I'd rather put them all out in the open from the get-go if we're saying that our community can't exist without people having a very clear sense of what a sense of belonging in this church community looks like.
Yes, that's great.
And I was
interesting that.
Yeah, I don't mind kind of ripping off of that. I think we've kind of said, but kind of the expectation element is, I think that community is realistic if we don't come into community with an idealistic view of community, because there's always a significant gap between the real and the ideal. It was like Dietrich Bonhoeffer once observed, that idealism about community can actually hurt real community. And when we value our ideal of Christian community more than real community, we can miss the gift that God wants to give us. And I don't think you have to read the New Testament too long before you get a realistic understanding of what community is like. And a realistic understanding of community is extremely messy. And real community involves a lot of forgiveness. It involves the need to strengthen our craft of reconciliation. And maybe just as an example, to illustrate maybe one of the biggest lessons I've learned in this area of, say, forgiveness and reconciliation. So this is a fairly dramatic example, but in November of 1990, as the long struggle for freedom in the apartheid South Africa was reaching its climax, there was a group of Black and white spiritual leaders from almost all the churches in the land met in this hotel in a little town called Rustenburg. And some of the leaders represented people who had been wounded and wronged who had wounded and wronged the blacks. Others represented the people who had been so horribly wronged and wounded. And so these men and women, they came together to answer two questions. Could blacks ever forgive? And could blacks and whites ever be truly united as brothers and sisters? And so Desmond Tutu, as I think many would know, amazing spiritual leader for many in South Africa, answered for the wounded and the wronged in his for his beloved country. And he gave his answer in a very straightforward speech that bears the title, We Forgive You, published in the collection of his speeches under the title of the Rainbow People of God. And Tutu said this: forgive, yes. The victims of injustice and oppression must be ever ready to forgive. But could there ever be a coming together? That's another question. Those who have wronged us must be ready to make what amends they can. If I have stolen your pen, I can't really be contrite when I say, please forgive me, if at the same time I still keep your pen. If I'm truly repentant, then I will demonstrate this genuine repentance by returning your pen. Then reunion, which is always costly, will happen. It can't just happen when by saying, let bygones be bygones. And so what I kind of pulled from this is that, again, we can forgive somebody even if they keep the pen, but we shouldn't be their friend until they give it back. And so one of the greatest lessons I've learned when it comes to being in community with others, it's messy, is just knowing the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. And it's a lesson that's actually helped me to forgive terrible things that people have done to me, because it's just, that unique difference. Lewis Smead is a really kind of an expert in this whole forgiveness area. And he helped me to understand the difference between forgiveness and reunion. So it takes one person to forgive. It takes two people to be reunited. Even like you think about our relationship with God, right? Christ has forgiven the world. Doesn't mean that everybody's reunited with him. Forgiveness happens inside of the wounded person. Reunion happens in the relationship between people. We can forgive a person who never says they're sorry, but we cannot truly be reunited unless they're honestly sorry. We can forgive even if we do not trust the person who wronged us to not wrong us again, but reunion can only happen if we trust the person who wronged us not to wrong us again. Forgiveness has no strings attached. Reunion has several things attached. And so I think there's a lot could be said there, but essentially when we don't forgive, we become bitter. It doesn't actually affect the other person. It just hurts us. It poisons us. And I worked at a psych hospital for a year, and I've seen what it does to people who hold on to bitterness. And we just have to let go of any bitterness that we have. That reconciliation is a process.
Sure.
And it requires, something from the other person.
That's good.
Yeah, JR, wow. I think that you're saying something that when we're talking about the trying to address people's realistic expectations of community, you're really, really hitting on the thing, right? It's not you're not trying to come into a community and say that community is realistic or unrealistic based off of, are my own needs met? Right? It's can community, you have to be asking the question, is community realistic or unrealistic to you because you're making a commitment to this group of people, which then you should just be anticipating that there's going to be some tension points. There's going to be conflict, right? That's one of the biggest things that we emphasize in our local community is if you're going to be a part of this community, please, one of the biggest and realistic expectations is we're going to have tension and conflict because we're human beings. But what we're banking on is, can we actually learn to love and not appease one another? Not avoid one another, not just dismiss our thoughts or feelings, right? But are we actually committing to lean in towards one another because Jesus has banked his entire ministry on the fact that can we actually love one another? He didn't say if you love one another, it's going to be really great for you. He didn't say it's going to be, if you love one another, other people will learn about what it means to love one another, right? He said, if you love one another, that's the one way that an outside world will actually see who I am. right?
Yeah.
Jesus's ministry wasn't banking on his teachings. He's banking on the life of a community, not just the individual disciples, right? And so I just think that community is realistic because we're entering into a tension point on purpose and saying that we are going to commit to one another. And this is how we're going to redefine what belonging is.
That's great. Love it, Eun. So good. This second question is related to some of what just came up there. Community can grow inward and toxic. I'm sure we've all tasted some of that. Community can grow inward and toxic, and when it purely becomes a place for us. How do we create a community that is also porous and open and outward focused? I've had this experience where I've been part of really bonded communities that start to feel threatened when new or unfamiliar or outside people enter into that space or culture. And unconsciously, we became an us and became a bit ingrown and became sealed off. So how do we create community that's not toxic, that's outward and focused and porous?
So I think you have to have a both and in order to do that. So if we think about like healthy, non-toxic community has secure attachment in it. We know ourselves and we trust others, which we only actually get that on the other side of conflict. Before conflict, we just have agreement, but we don't have trust. And we don't have secure attachment, which is why JR talking about that forgiveness and reconciliation repair process, that is necessary rhythm in there for actual community, for actual connectedness. Everything else is a shallow version of what we're created for. And so if we look at it that way, the way I like to think about having healthy community that also then doesn't become protective. Although that shepherd protection like impulse will rise to the surface for sure. But I always try to think about it as a practice ground, and that I'm sent out from that community into a mission field that is where I'm learning that. So inside the community, I'm learning and growing and healing into secure attachment with God and others. And so it's a less challenging space. It's more of that repair space. But then also I'm connected outside of the community. And that's where I'm trying to practice. That's where my edge is. That's where I'm learning how to be with other people that are harder to be with, that I don't choose to be with. And so one of them is more that healing space, and the other is more that practice training space that keeps me growing. So if I remember I'm inside a community for the purpose of going out, then they're not in competition. So that's why I lean into the both and. And so, so for me, it's like, where's my repair space, and where is God stretching and challenging and growing me?
Yes, that's good. Thanks, Jess. Any other thoughts on toxic community versus a community that's open? And
I think, like, one of the practices that I've had, and one of the ways that we really even train church planners, is kind of having personal space that's more of a closed space where we can really dive deep and learn to be more like Jesus in every way. But having another space that's like a social space of 20 to 50 people, that we're really inviting other people and giving them a sense of belonging. I realized, when I was planning in LA, that a huge need is belonging. And I think certainly today, with after the pandemic and all of that, we've talked about that really need in all of us. But we have to kind of create some spaces for that. And I think as Christians, we're called to be hospitable people, and we have to have certain values. But I think what was interesting to me is we would just have a dinner, and people shared their parts of their life that really made a difference. And this was Christians, non-Christians, and it just kind of started to grow because people will pay big bucks just to have somebody listen to them for an hour, right? Bringing them into community, more people coming each week. It was such a simple thing. And yet people were finding a place to belong. And because, we had like a core of us Christ followers, and the others could be, maybe they're not Christian, maybe they are, but they're not, in a committed community yet. They started to kind of, in some ways, what Jessie was saying is like, there's that mirroring that happens. They start to see how we behave, and they start to behave a little bit more like us. And then before long, they start to believe like us. And then before long, we have some baptisms. It's kind of like, I think church, sometimes church within the walls is, you have to believe what we believe, behave how we behave, and then we'll give you a place to belong. I think the incarnational church really needs to be saying, where are we creating space where people can belong? And we have this kind of core group that's really living into deep community that's bounded, so we can, there's a somewhat of a protection there. But we open that other space wide open and invite anybody and everybody to be a part of it. And then the beauty of the relationships that develop, people who think different than me, people who believe different than me. I think we need to be interacting, especially in our polarized world. We got to be connecting. Why do you believe that? What kind of gives you such passion about this issue? Talk to me about it. And I just want to understand their life and space to dialogue, real dialogue, not just passing each other, on the street, not throwing out a tweet here to try to make a point and score things with your crowd, but be willing to kind of just get to know people in real ways. And we have to, there may be a good reason why we've been given 2 ears and 1 mouth, so that we might listen better.
And any thoughts into what?
Yeah, I think that, Jared, just from what you were just saying, is that I think that and this alludes to the toxicity issue about sometimes how communities can turn into places like that, is I think it's like a social competence that Christian Jesus followers, imitators of Christ, actually have to learn. People have to be discipled into gaining a social competence to know that, oh, that's right, I have 2 ears and 1 mouth on a purpose. That like my like maybe the way that I'm supposed to interact with people, maybe that are not inside yet, right? Is a particular way to love them, right? And to not be so polarizing, right? To pause and listen. But most people, I think, have to actually be discipled in order to do that, in order to make that be a way to extend hospitality, and not just, I'm going to invite you into a small group because I make a good pot of coffee. You know what I mean? Yeah. I think the other part about the toxic nature in community, I actually think that you have to start with who is on the inside now, and do the people who are in the inside now reflect the community that you are residing in, or the community that you are being sent out to. If there is a discrepancy on what an inside crowd looks like and what the community looks like, then I think that you're just leading into a way for a toxic community that wants to be insular, because they haven't wrestled through a diversity issue. They may not have wrestled through that there are differences, right? And there may be different preferences. We in our community, besides the conflict resolution and expectation of that, the other thing that we highlight is the fivefold or APES gifting on purpose, because it's an easy way for us to begin to be like, look at this room. We all have a common bond because we all love Jesus. Right? We all have a common bond because we've said yes to him and are trying to pursue a life that imitates his. But look how different we are. We all think about that, or our first initial step towards that is a little bit different, which means that we have an expectation that how we're going to step towards one another is going to be a little different, and how we step towards an outside community is going to be a little different. So we spend a lot of time learning about what those differences may look like, and really, really accentuate the fact that these are preferences. And it's a gift to all of us that we can do this hospitality community way better, including all the diverse voices that ought to reflect the community around us, and the diverse voices of different giftings.
Great. Let's poke at a bit of a bear here, because we've touched on some of this a little bit. But typically, when you talk about community, especially with a Christian, the first imagination they have is a small group. We know the small group ministry phenomenon that started in the 70s, but every church, whether small or big, said how you have community is you start small groups, and you have a small group ministry and a small group pastor and a small group curriculum and small groups. And there's an entire industry written around how to build small groups. So that's most people's imagination. But that often small groups are within the church walls. I don't mean just literally within the church walls, but they're a church program. If you want to belong to church, you go to a small group. And there's a lot of research out there that's questioning whether people even felt belonging in small groups in the last 30, 40 years. But my question setup is it possible, or how do we start community outside the church walls? And can that actually be considered church? That's a bit of a tension question that people are asking. If it's not in a small group and it's not at a Sunday gathering, it's not church. No way, Jose. Is it possible to form community outside the church walls and that to be considered the ecclesia, for that to be considered being part of the church? Let's poke at that a little bit.
I'm excited to poke at this because I'm literally at a retreat center with a secular tech company. The owners of this tech company are not Christians, although they are spiritual. And they have a greater sense of community with their 50 employees than most churches I've been in. They have a value for love. They have a value for joy. They have a value for care and connection and supporting one another as they do the mission of the work of their technology, right? And the relationships that they have with each other are profound. And it has been the first thing that has reminded me at some sense of scale of actual community since I left the wilderness ministry. And here's the things that are the same. And I understand where the marks of the church come from. If you want to read history, anybody who's listening can look at where the marks of the church come from, and they come from the Reformation in reaction to the Catholic Church. But here's when you experience actual, authentic, brave community, they have these similar things. They share life with one another, because actually meal sharing is sacrament. Storytelling, story sharing is sacrament. Laughter is sacrament. Being with somebody while they're grieving is sacrament. And we've made all of these other things that, in order to to have some sort of power and control dynamics, we've called other things sacrament, when really these life dynamics are what are sacrament in the kingdom of God. Not necessarily in the church, but in the kingdom of God, these are sacrament.
Yeah.
And the thing that unite us to one another. And so I think we just have the marks wrong. We're looking at the wrong things. We're emphasizing the wrong things, and we're missing that what actually unites us, builds character, right? Because the role of community is to build character. Because you can't build character in your prayer closet. You can't become more Christ-like in your prayer closet. You only become more Christ-like when you're out there being shaped by the world and by one another. So it's that life on life aspect in the midst of all of the things. Not that we compartmentalize them out, or we just pray for them at the end of a little chat where we're processing this a lesson. It's not school, right? But it's life. And we're going to pray not to fix each other, but to just invite Jesus into every aspect of who we are individually and who we are together. Good. So I'm just super excited.
That's good. Yeah, Jess, you're challenging and then also redirecting that. The challenge is that the marks we've defined as church, the liturgical marks, whatever they are have not really been connected to the attachment of being with a people, or the relational quality of being with a people. They've been different marks. You're saying that we need to change our marks, our metrics to define what it means to actually grow relationally with a people. Is that what you're?
Yeah. May they be more human and less religious.
There you go. Okay. Any other thoughts on?
Yeah. I have
just outside the walls.
So I was kind Yeah. I was at this emerging missional leader meeting with a lot of young people, probably like Gen Z. And there was a girl that was about 22, and she was saying, like, none of my friends want to go to church. Well, it's already kind of betraying her understanding of church as something you go to, as opposed to something that you are. But as she was talking, she was describing her community or her friends and what they do. They certainly had community. There was no question about that. Now, for me, when I think about church, if you have to define it in its most simple terms, I think about communion or relation with God. You know, the where community began. At the beginning was the Father, Son, and Spirit. And I think about the commission, but which is kind of both discipleship and mission. So I think for church, like, you know, those would be probably my marks of what church is. But can you have community? Yeah, like absolutely, you can create a sense of community. But and so as she was talking, that no, some of these people even had, you know, a relationship with God, so they had communion as well, and maybe less so, and maybe in some ways, like she didn't describe it long enough for me to know what was the discipleship, but I do feel like they had some sense of mission, and I just couldn't help but think like there's probably only little tweaks for that group actually to be the church. And they think they're, you know, but they still have in their mind church is something you go to instead of something that you are. And so I do think we have to define, like, what are the marks. I think community, commission is probably elements. And I think if you're missing one of those, you miss the church. But all that to say, community could be the entree into the other things. And I think we can create community, a very mixed community that isn't the full expression of the church, but it's getting there. It's part of the way there. But I think if we don't connect to our Creator and we don't kind of understand our setness, then, you know, it's not church in the way, at least I understand it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that if a community has discipleship that's clear and it's active and people are participating in it, that is connected to the renewal of the community around them that they reside in, and that group is also connected to that outside community, that it's no longer an outside community. I think that's where church is happening, right? I think Soong-Chan Rah, we had invited him to speak during the pandemic to just come and do a talk with a group of local Hawaii pastors, and just asking, like, what's the thing that we should really be anchoring our hearts to? How should we be leading our churches right now? And he's just like, what a moment for the Holy Spirit to work. Because if you look at the history of the church, you know, you always see that in wherever there is a crossroads of a primary community and a secondary community. A primary community meaning it's the place, the key place that people actually have a sense of identity and belonging. And that secondary community is a key place where people have a sense of purpose met, right? They're doing something together. Anytime that there are crossroads of identity and purpose, communities meeting together, you see the work of the Holy Spirit. It changed the way that I thought about church. It took my community 5 years for them to be like, we're a church, aren't we? Because it took them 5 years of doing intentional work, of being discipled, where this primary identity shaping a community is also constantly in that crossroads of what does it mean to be there with and for and in a secondary community, right? Constantly making intentional ways so that crossroads is happening all the time, right? If that's what church is, that's what convinced my community. Like, we're not just a faith community. Now they're actually saying, hi, we're from Makilo'o. We're actually a church. That's what it took. I knew it was a church because I'm having clarity about its discipleship being activated. Is it connected to renewal for the sake of the neighborhood, city that we live in? I know that, but I also know that it's a grace to my people that I have to have transition points, many experiences for them, so they live this out. They live through this so that now they're like, I don't think I can go back to what church was like, because I know and I've lived and experienced what church is like now.
That's good. Thanks, Eun. So it's obvious the transition, the imagination from going to church. That's what defines me and defines a church, is the attendance to it. That's just such a behemoth. It's big. And so the transition of believing that we are the church outside the church walls, when we're sharing life together, when we're sharing mission together, when we're sharing formation together, that's actually where the church exists. We know, and Eun just shared, like it's a long journey for people to finally say, "Oh, this is real church." I knew this in my own church plant. The first 2 or 3 years, people are like, "When are we going to do real church?" You like, we are. This is it. And it's a hard imagination to shift, because that our Christendom concept of church is just so baked into everything. So patience and grace, which we're all familiar, we have to practice, is so good. This last question here is a little nerdy, but it's connected to everything that we're talking about. Sociologist Edward T. Hall asserts that belonging is not as simple as belonging to a blob of people, that we actually belong at very distinct levels, 4 distinct levels, various emotional attachments, and he calls this the 4 spaces of belonging. There's a lot of people who have riffed off his work and explored different avenues of how it works out. But ultimately, the 4 spaces of belonging are intimate space, personal space, social space, and public space. Joseph Meyer's book explored these in greater detail. He really dove deep into all those categories. Yet most churches try to build steam and energy around belonging to a crowd in public space. Their finances, their staffing, their promotion is, if we can get people to be attached to this crowd, maybe they'll find belonging. This is how people self-identify, is I belong to this crowd, especially when it comes to church growth. How do we work with this paradigm of social space, personal space, public space, intimate space? Personal space is 6 to 12 people, and typically people would think, oh, that's a small group. But there's a lot of research out there that personal space, for a lot of people, going to small group didn't really create a sense of attachment. Even throughout the week, they'd see them for an hour and then not talk to each other again for a long time. There's a challenge right now around these 4 spaces, and whether the church actually wants to participate in them, whether they want to put all their eggs in public space, whether they want to put all their eggs in digital space. I'm just opening it up here. What do we do with these 4 spaces when it comes to the way people connect in community? And does this have anything to do with the future of the church?
Yeah, I think it has a lot to do with the future of the church. In a lot of ways, again, like I feel like this 20-year-old girl was kind of describing this young group as they were starting to live into that future. But I think these 4 social realities are super significant. You know, that intimate space. I think that that's very organic. It's that 3 or 4 people that we can fully trust and let our hair down, share both like the horrible things that are going on, but also celebrate the good things that are happening. And talk about how my walk with God's going. Like I can, by the way, I do this with sometimes Christians, non-Christians, combination of that intimate space. It has a lot of element. So it's more like the space from going from unknown to being known. And I think the former small group, I think we need to focus more on what is it that's to me a great place to make disciples. It's kind of where the space that Jesus used with the 12 to train them. And then that social space, 20 to 50-ish, that to me that's ideal, where you create a space of mission where we get our Christian and non-Christian friends together. It can be very organic. There's a lot of templates that you could be for that. You could be the host of that space. You could be a guest in that space. But it's not just about community, but I think like that mission happens best there. It doesn't have, by the way, like, discipleship happens best in this other space. We're not going to intimate needs met in the big public space. We're not going to really get discipleship happening in the public space like I'm talking about, how Jesus did with his 12, live with them, day in, day out, did life together. And I think like mission doesn't best happen. Maybe you get the very low hanging fruit that may come to a service that is geared toward that group of people. But we're kind of beyond that. I think we need to actually, incarnation means like we go out to them and we kind of create space that is comfortable for them. And I think social space is ideal for that, because if I just invite somebody to, quote, the old small group, it's pretty clear anybody with a little bit of social, emotional intelligence can read the room and feel like an outsider right off the bat. But you've got like 40, 50 people at a party, like number one, you're bound to find somebody that you can connect with. But I just think it's an ideal space. So if mission, if discipleship, if our intimate needs are met in these other three spaces, I think public space, I don't think we should idolize it like the mega church does. I don't think we should demonize it like maybe some parts of the house church does. I think we actually need to reimagine it. And I remember, just even Eun, we were on the phone yesterday, and you guys have more public space. You spend most of your time in these other spaces, but share with you what you shared about, what your public space been like, and kind of a reimagining of that.
Yeah, I agree with J.R. Woodward. I think that these four social, thoughts of how people behave is crucial for how to think about not just the church of the future, but the church of now, the church of a post-pandemic era. All the loss that I think the church, Big C church, felt hit with in the past 3 years. I really, really believe that this is a key part of sometimes humbly learning or relearning how people actually interact with one another, and the four spaces of belonging. It really, really helps. Like for us, I'm going to borrow from J.R. Woodward. He always asked in the earlier days for us, he always asked like, you have to constantly be thinking about, not about growth or not about all these other things. You're constantly asking, what do you feel like you're called to multiply? That's what you put your eggs in, And we knew from the beginning that the thing that we're going to put the basket we're going to put all our eggs in, or the thing that we're going to multiply, is not a worship service. It's not that public space. It was from the get-go, that discipleship core, that personal space that has that intentional equipping, training, formation, that has to be tethered tightly to that social space or that community on mission together. We wanted to multiply that. And we made it from the get-go that until we multiply that at least 5 times, we are going to commit to not holding a public worship gathering of any sense. My people hated that idea, FYI. And I probably threw J.R. Woodward a little bit under the bus, but people love him. So, it was okay. But having that clarity helped us to not be pulled by that temptation that is church real unless we have a public worship gathering. Right? That it shifted and helped us to actually clarify what it is that we want disciples, and we want disciples in community on mission together. That's essentially what we want to multiply, right? Year one, we started with that. It felt kind of small, and I really thought this is going to be the next 5 years of my life. The small group of 15 people, pour into them day in, day out, connecting to mission. Oh my gosh, increase social competence. Have friends who are non-Christians. We just work on that. Day in, day out, right? Do that. But, we're 6 years in now. We've multiplied to 9 different missional communities, where we started with just 15 people. There are over 100 Christians being discipled actively today in our church who are connected to over 650 people that they're actively on mission together with. By the end of 2023, we're going to be multiplied to 12. So do I believe that church can exist in this way? Yes, I do. Absolutely. And I would rather have these people, all of these disciples are not connected to me. Some of them, they don't even know that I exist. And I'm the lead pastor of this church, right? They're connected to their leaders because you're connected finally to the people who are modeling discipleship for you in a real life context, who are living out character, who are living out wisdom, who are living out their thoughts about God, being sent out into the community. So yes, I 100% believe that this is the way of how church ought to be.
Love it. Just throw a wrench in the mix. What do you think? What do you?
Well, I think, I mean, I don't know if I have a wrench in the mix, but I definitely, I think that a lot of the time okay, so a couple of things that I do see is, one, we don't think about things this way. Pastors don't think about these things. Faith leaders don't think about things in this way. And so we're committed to whatever number of people show up to our gathering, and we're expecting a level of intimacy and commitment that is inappropriate, actually. Like pastors think of them as their children. They call them their sheep, right? And there's a level of laying down their life, but what does the person on the other end of that relationship think about? And I think that there are different levels of trust, and you guys, I know you believe this too, different levels of trust for each one of those social spaces. So we have to match and align the commitment that we're asking for with the actual trust we've built, and that it matches what's in their mind. That's so good. I mean, it kind of goes into what the question in the Q&A box is saying. I think a lot of the time if we're wearing our shepherd heart, we're overcommitting to a group of people, and then we're asking for them to model and mirror that back. And they're like, wait a minute, are you just going to use me to staff your children's ministry? Like they've been used, the pastors have been disappointed. And so we haven't actually aligned and right-sized the commitment. So I always wonder why we're making it so weird and hard in church. Like, why don't we think we do this with our friends? We have different levels of commitment and trust with, our different peer groups, our different friend groups. There's the phone call that you'll answer no matter what time of day. And there's the phone call that you'll get back to tomorrow. Right. And then we have our party space, and we have our people that know most of the things that we're struggling with in real time. We do this naturally with our friends. Why don't we do it better in church and have that match the way that we do with our friends? Because people actually know how to do this. Right. So when you're asking for commitment from people, you're asking them to trust you in a way, but what do they have in their mind that they're being invited into? What do they have in their mind that you're asking them to commit to? And I think that where we've asked people for so long in the church growth dynamic to go all in on our thing, but for them it's just an event. It might be our life, but for them it's just a weekly event. And so there's been misalignment there. So I think we have to slow down and have better conversations and stop making it so weird.
Yes, that's good. I have a friend who says that ministry leaders need to learn how to become community organizers. And he was talking about that because he's a community organizer on the ground in our city. And so there's so many church dynamics of learning how to organize and bring people together, how to be socially and emotionally tuned into people, how to network people together that you feel like would be good for each other or would be supportive of each other, all these community organizing tactics. He said, but most ministry leaders are versed in how to preach a sermon, how to put together a program, and then measure whether people came or didn't come. He's like, has so little to do with organizing people on a grassroots level. And I can't help but think we just need to relearn, retrain, be re-equipped on how to be community organizers. We're so good at monologue and what you were saying, put on an event that's really not creating a sense of connection and togetherness for people. This is so good.
And I also think that we assume too much trust. We assume too much trust, and we haven't take time. We don't take the time to build trust, because you need trust before you have commitment.
Totally.
And so I think that is also a fairly inappropriate way that we operate in church right now.
So if we have time, there's a question that someone's asking here, like, how do you call others into this kind of community that emphasizes being committed for the sake of building trust and connection without it being heard as you need to be committed, i.e. we need you to show up? In church planning, I attempt to make this kind of invitation, but it was heard by some as pressure to be regularly present rather than to and asked to draw close to Jesus and one another to become shaped together. Curious then, if this kind of invitation is given to others, pushback on it, should this be an indicator of a planter that those being invited do not grasp the vision of why we start this way? So that's a long question, but I wanted to make sure we got to some question.
Yeah, who wants to? I think we touched on that a little bit with the discipleship space, the training space versus the social space. Eun, what do you think? Could you touch on that question?
Yeah, I think that in the short time that we have, I think the best thing for leaders is to be very clear about what it is you're inviting people to. If you're a church planter, thinking about starting your church in this manner, then you must be really clear about what you're inviting people to, and really, really sort through what their idealized expectation is. And also what your expectation is also, right? That's why for us, every year, every single person who wants to be a part of that personal space or that discipleship core within any of our missional communities, they all have a one-on-one conversation with a leader on purpose, because we want to know that, is it very clear to them what our vision is? Is it really clear to them what the invitation is? Is it clear to them what the commitment level is? And can we vet through what are some of these expectations that we have to also clarify for people? It's a way to love them well. And you know what? People trust you more when you tell them, I don't have everything together. I don't have all the pieces figured out together yet. I just know that this is where we want to start. And this is where we're hoping to get to. I don't have everything lined up in between, but the invitation is, I'd really love if you can be a part of figuring that out together.
Mm-hmm. That's good. Thanks, Eun. Hey, thanks, friends. Good work, good discussion. We could go all day. Just want to share with you and those who get the replay that this is sponsored by the Praxis Gathering, which is coming up September 28th through 30th. And we are going to be exploring all these themes of church without walls and what God is doing outside of traditional structures. And we generated a unique discount code for you, discount 20. If you put that into your registration, you'll get 20% off on your ticket. We'd love to see you there. We're all going to be there, right? We're all going to be there, and a lot of our friends are going to be there. It's a beautiful space. Thanks for attending, and I'll see you on the other side. Peace.